So I basically decided to start this series of videos in response to the Spoony videos. If you haven't watched them or you don't know who Spoony is, go ahead and look it up. But basically he does a series called Counter Monkey where he talks about experiences he had and interesting stories that involved tabletop role-playing, like D&D and stuff like that. And basically got the idea from working at a game store. That's what they'd call the people who came in just to talk about, their experiences with D&D. They called them counter monkeys. So this is my response to those videos because I figured I have a couple interesting stories too, so I thought I'd make videos of my own. So to start it off though, I actually didn't start role-playing until well into high school. I actually started with my friends and we had no idea what we were doing at the time. We just started playing it. But even back further, we played a game called Warhammer. And if you don't know what Warhammer is, it's basically a tabletop strategy game that involves miniatures. I have one right here. Basically you buy these box sets where you assemble these miniature guys. Like this is a high elf spearman. You basically get a box set that's like 16 of these guys. You assemble them yourselves, you paint them themselves like I did with this guy, and you set them up in their own regiment or however you want to strategize it, and you basically go to war with other people using these units. And it's split off into different races. Like I chose the high elves, there's orcs, there's humans, empire, basically, there's dwarves, things like that. And basically you assemble an army, you buy models, you put them together, you make your army choice out of that, and then you battle each other through rolls of the dice, basically D&D stuff. There were a few differences, but so it wasn't a cheap hobby. In fact, I don't even know exactly how I came. Actually, no, I do. So I come from a town that really the only form of entertainment we had was a movie theater and a bowling alley. Like that's basically it. That's all we had. So to get into something like that, it was really hard to, find yourself being interested, because you don't want to make that kind of commitment, because like where are you gonna go to start something like that? But I think I came across it. I was actually visiting my oldest brother in another town a couple of miles from where I grew up in, and they actually had a hobby shop. It was a bigger town, so they had more choices of what to do with yourself. So they had a hobby shop, and my parents always liked to go there, and so I would browse around and stuff, and found a box set of miniatures that you use in this game. I was like, this looks really interesting. So I kept browsing and finally found like a starter box. It was this huge box. I don't have it anymore, unfortunately. But it was basically a starter kit that had like a basically enough pieces you need for a full game for an Empire army and an Orc army. And it came with an instruction book, and I was like, this is really cool. So I begged my parents, I was like, this has my interest. So they got it for me, and I basically busted it open and started getting really interested in it. I assembled, all the armies together. I looked through the rule book, and it is one hell of a rule book. As for, I guess, any RPG or, tabletop role-playing game, I guess. This is actually the newer edition, but this is what it looks like. Actually, they probably updated it again. They always update. But it's a lot of stuff. Like, special rules, just basic melee combat, I believe, goes on for like 5 pages. But, so it was pretty intense stuff, but it was fun. Like, I thought it was really cool. The only problem was, who do I play it with? So eventually I end up convincing a couple of my friends, hey, you should play this and it'd be really fun. And so they started getting really into it. And then they realized, well, we all realized, and it's in the rulebook too, that there's more armies. You could basically choose your army, buy box sets for certain units of that army, and you have your own special rules. There's army books for each one. This is a High Elf army book, and it basically gives you stats of, you know, like their movement range, their melee damage you do, how much health they have if they're leaders, you know, basic stats that they explain in the rulebook, but they don't really explain how they work, you know, with other races. Like the rulebook basically gives you simple examples of a human would have these stats, an orc would have these stats. So you'd use that to play, you know, play around with it, but never really explained exactly how those come into play if you have other races. That's all they had was the humans and orcs. And so basically we realized we need to get army books, you know, and start out, you know, find our own armies, picking our own armies. So so I chose High Elves. I thought they were really cool. Actually, I don't even know why I chose them. I think they just look cool. Like, I think that's how we basically all picked our armies. But so I picked High Elves. I had a friend who picked Empire, and we sort of lampooned him into it. We were like, he's the only friend in our group who hadn't played it yet, and we're like, dude, you should, you know, start this. What the heck? And like I said, it's not a cheap hobby though. So we sort of like kind of helped him along with it. It's like, you know, well, you know, birthday and Christmas, just tell your parents, you know, hey, this is what I want instead, you know. In fact, I think paints alone, like just to paint models and stuff, for like $25. And I dug these things out of storage just recently, and all my paints had dried out completely. So yeah, it's a good $200 completely gone. I mean, I used them up, but I mean, they still had some left in them. But so yeah, I had a friend who was an Empire race, humans basically, like I said. Then another friend of mine did Wood Elves, and he actually picked it at a perfect time because, like I said, they update things constantly. Games Workshop, who runs Warhammer. In fact, I think Orcs are getting a new update, but pretty much like every time they're done updating one thing, they update the next thing. So they're going through this thing where the Wood Elves are being updated. In fact, when I was done playing, like around the time when I stopped playing with my friends, they had a new starter box, which was goblins versus dwarves instead of the humans versus orcs. And they changed the rule, like they completely changed dwarves and completely changed. That's the rule book I have, was this completely altered version of the game that they updated. So they're always doing updates, and so Wood Elves were just about done being updated, and so my friend was like, these guys look pretty badass. And they were pretty cool. They went against the norm. Most of the races you have will start off with basic spearmen, like the one I just showed you. But they didn't. Their basic units were archers, which were usually a backup unit for the close-up infantry. But no, their basic unit was, you have archers, and that's the first thing you would buy if you want to do Wood Elves. And so it was really fascinating. That was their strength, basically. So, and then my other friend, finally, I had another friend who decided to be Chaos, and I will get into them later. Yeah. Going back into strategies, though, yeah, each race, the really cool thing about it, and I didn't even learn it until later on, was each race had its own strength. For the most part, like the Wood Elves, their strength was obviously range. Their range stats were a lot better than any other races, like by far. Again, the High Elves, I didn't even know this for the longest time, their strength was magic. And most of the armies I've assembled usually didn't have a mage. Like, magic was kind of, you know, a 50-50 chance. I mean, it was roll the dice, so of course, you know, you have your, you know, what ifs. You know, you're always taking risks, you know, no matter what you do in the game, but magic just seemed like it was more of a risk. That, and every time I tried to play a wizard, someone else would always counter that wizard and do a really good job against it. So I was kind of iffy. I was like, High Elves aren't really that great at magic then. But actually I was wrong, because every race has their own set of magic. And, phone's going off. Has their own set of magic. But the rule book also has like 5 or 6 different sections of magic too. In some races, I think Empire, like, you could choose, like, you know, a couple of these types of magic. Like, you're limited to, like, this type of magic, this type of magic, this type of magic. But then I later realized that High Elves could choose any magic they wanted to. Any in the book, any of the 8 or 6 or 7 that were in the book, or the lore of their own. So then I realized that's awesome, and so I started finding strategies from that. You know, if I'm playing Wood Elves, you know, what would be good against Wood Elves? You know, what type of magic, you know, like fireballs and stuff, you know, may be more useful. I don't think that's how it worked, but, so yeah, we started finding that kind of things out, and we realized that it actually did play a huge significance. Like, I didn't win a lot of battles, and I realized, you know, I need to utilize the magic more. With the case of my friend who is the Wood Elves, he hardly ever used his archers. He'd always go right into the fray, you know, start fighting people, and they were more guerrilla warfare type strategies. Like, I think only 2 of the units he had actually had armor. His archers, you weren't allowed to have armor. The minute they got damaged, they were dead. They didn't have any hit points either. You know, 1 hit, you know, you lose an archer. And he never really learned that. Not to say that he was bad at the game, it's just he'd always somehow want to just go straight into battle full blown. He'd still keep his archers back, but I mean, even the units who were capable of melee that he had weren't really the kind to go head to head against most of the units we had, you know. They're more, you know, the cleanup. They're skirmishers. It was guerrilla warfare. You wanted to hit and run, or, you know, get them in the side, the flanks, and the rear. So it was a really fun game, just, you know, strategy wise. I never figured out what the Chaos's strength was. Empire is basically a jack of all trades. They had decent magic. In fact, in the lore of the whole Warhammer thing, they're actually trained by the High Elves, so they were decent at magic. They weren't completely capable as High Elves were, but they had some good things going for them. They had a lot of good machines. They had cannons, which were always extremely devastating. If you ever played the original game of Warhammer, and it's not exactly Warhammer at all, but it's basically the same thing. I can't think of what the game is called, but it was basically Warhammer, but simplified. Like, you got the box, the board game, and you had all the armies, and it was only like 2 armies facing off against each other, but they had, you know, the evil side was orcs, chaos, night elves are another race, and then on the human side you had knights. Actually, I think that's all the humans had. You're basically the humans. But the humans had cannon, and the enemy had a ogre, like warlord or something. Like, those were the 2 strengths that each army had. So the Empire had the cannon, and even in that game, I remember it was pretty devastating. It was still chancy to use. You really didn't know where it was going to land exactly, where you tell it to. Again, it's roll the dice, but it was pretty devastating. And so the same thing with my friend who was the Empire. He actually landed a cannonball in the middle of a rank of archers, just totally out of the blue. Like, it was a total guess on his part, and he, you know, they're all pretty much gone. If they weren't gone, the rest of them fleed, which was an interesting rule in the game. They had psychology challenges, I think they'd call them, tests, where every unit would have a leadership stat, and you'd roll against the leadership. And so if something happened, like if you had a unit that was decimated, like more than half or something like that died in one round of fighting, you'd have to roll the leadership to see if they would run or not, because in a realistic situation, like, I don't know, realistic, but in, you know, it would make sense in that sort of situation, they might not want to stay around very much longer. Same went with if a leader died. You'd have to determine the distance between the leader and other units, and any other units that failed a psychology test around where the leader died, they would have to run away because they just saw their leader get killed, and so like it would cause them to flee. So it had a lot of interesting aspects to it like that. But yeah, Empire was all over the place. They didn't really have anything good infantry wise. They basically had spearmen or assorted. What was it? Assorted guard? I don't remember, but it was basically a unit of men at arms, and it was so cool because like the model pieces you'd get to assemble it, they're all varied. Like you'd have people with torches, you'd have people with pitchforks. Like there wasn't like, you know, a spear and a shield kind of thing. Like it was basically a bunch of townspeople just grabbed whatever shit they can use to kill things with, and you know, run off into battle. So that was an interesting unit, but of course they sucked because they're just citizens, you know, wielding swords. But the chaos. I never figured out what the chaos had strength-wise, because they were pretty much a cheap race. I don't want to say that, because my friend who played as them, like, he was a really good strategist. You know, he knew what worked and what didn't work, but he was lucky enough to pick a race that it didn't really matter if you knew what worked or what didn't work. You could basically slaughter anybody. Like, thinking back at it, like, seriously, they were cheap. Like, it was messed up. They were so overpowered. It was ridiculous. And again, I don't know if they changed it, and I don't even know if our friend, you know, was lying about it or didn't actually understand how his army book worked. But they sucked. And it came to the point where whenever he wanted to play against one of us, we'd all be like, oh, yeah, like, really? You're just gonna kill me? You know? But I mean, we'd always do it anyway, because we're always waiting for that one moment where we figure it out. Like, we know that one weakness, you know, like that trench in the Death Star. You know, there's gotta be that one little thing, you know, as tiny and insignificant as it seems, you know, there's gotta be a way to defeat his army. But they were a powerhouse. Like, it was cheap, and it pissed us off. I always looked at it as it's like playing rock paper scissors with somebody and always picking dynamite. It's like, what's the point of playing then? You know, if there's that one thing that is going to win every time, you know. So it bugged us, but again, it didn't really get us down that much. It was just. It was a common enemy, really. I mean, every time one of us had to play against him, we'd be like, oh, we're gonna lose, you know, and we'd always be rooting for the friend who had to play against the Chaos, you know, or the friend with the Chaos army, because it's like, you know, just waiting for that one victory, you know. It even came to the point where we could have sworn there's something wrong. Like, he wasn't doing anything, like, he wasn't setting things up right with his army book, because assembling most armies that you see in your army book, like the Hyles one I have, most, if not all, units have special I want to say equipment, basically special rules to them where you could spend extra points. You go by a point system, so you'd be like, hey, you want to play a 1,000-point game? Sure. So you look in your army book, you know, a single spearman's worth like 12 points. Okay, so 12 of them, you know. So, and some of them, I believe the archers, the High Elf archers were like this, where they start off with their whole point value, they start off with short swords, basically, so they could fight in melee, their bows, and that's it. If you spend an extra, I believe, 2 points for each archer, you give them light armor, which makes them, you know, they don't go down immediately after getting hit. They still have a fighting chance. You roll to see if their armor does any good. And so most armies were like that. I mean, you could either play the unit vanilla, or you can add things to it. So apparently the Chaos had a lot of these. Like, there's a lot of things you can do to boost them up, to make them more powerful and stuff. Oh, I wish I could show you a picture, but I don't think I'd be able to bring it up. But it came to the point, basically what I'm trying to say is it came to the point where we started questioning him. We were like, so you're telling me that in order to kill any of your guys right now, in order to just hit one of your guys, because you roll to hit and then you roll to see if it killed anybody. So we'd be like, so you're telling me that to hit one of your basic unit guys, I'd have to roll a 6. And we're just like, no, what? And Warhammer's all 6-sided dice. And so we're like, you gotta be kidding me. So eventually came to the point where like, show me your army book and tell me exactly how you set these guys up, you know, to the point limit to make them this powerful. You know, we couldn't believe it. And sorry, I'm just trying to see if I can find the Chaos Army section in the rulebook. Yeah, so you can't... Basically, they look like this. You probably can't see it. But what I'm trying to show you are the Knights of Chaos, or the Chaos Warriors, I think they're called. I could probably just put a picture up when I edit this. But that was basically his army, were Chaos Warriors. I believe it comes with like 12 of them. Maybe 8. No, it was like 12 or something. It was a basic unit. Like that was... Instead of spearmen, Chaos had Chaos Warriors. They're basically these big, bulking, armored dudes that had battle axes or these big, huge swords, completely covered with armor. They weren't people anymore. Like that's basically the whole thing. They're demons. Chaos are like forms of demons, and so Chaos Warriors are men that basically aren't human. And believe you me, we agreed with that. So. Again, with that story, like we were like, you know, bullshit, there's no way your guys are this powerful, show me how you set this up. And so he showed us, and like, damn it, that was it, you know, that's exactly how it worked out, how he showed us. And so that made us pissed, not at him anymore, but basically the game itself, because like, how would a company that puts so much, you know, put so much thought into the rules of the game to make an army that's just so overpowered and so unkillable, basically. And we eventually figured it out. Like, we figured out what we were doing wrong. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, his army was basically the 12 warriors and a hero. So... And that would be his army. Like a 1,500 point game, you know, for anybody else, like for the High Elves, it would be a leader, you know, spearmen, archers, you know, 2 special, you know, units, guys who are more powerful than regular warriors kind of thing. And, you know, that's our 1,500 point army. But for him, it would be like his hero, maybe a mage, and these Chaos Warriors. Like 12 basic infantrymen. And that was his whole 1,500 point army. And that's when we realized that was what was happening. His Chaos Warriors were the whole deal. Like sometimes he had a pack of wolves. He had Chaos Raiders, I believe. They're horsemen, which was also terrifying because basically having horses meant you got to the front lines faster. So now we had something else to worry about while the warriors were slowly tromping towards us. Here are these horses, you know, men on horses harassing us. But basically his whole army was always just those warriors, and that took up most of his points. So we realized later on, looking through the rules, that we kind of missed one important rule to play in the game. We were kind of stupid. How we used to always play was just until one of the armies was completely destroyed or one of the players gave up. Which, if you played against Chaos, it happened quicker and quicker for each victory he had. But what we later realized was there's actually normally it's supposed to be played with a turn cap. So a basic game that people play in Warhammer are like 5 turns. One person goes, the other person goes. That's turn 1. One person goes, turn 2. And who wins is determined by how many points each team collected by the units they killed. So if one of my spearmen gets killed in the fight, that's 12 points towards the other player. You basically grab that piece, put it in your pile of the units you destroyed, and those are your, that's your total after the turns end up. And so that kind of changed it a lot against the chaos. And this is basically what this whole video is about, is this war against the chaos. Like, that basically was it. Like, we would have fun playing against each other sometimes. I'd play against wood elves, completely slaughter them most of the time, by the way. It was fun and stuff. We were enjoying the game because of that. But whenever it came to the chaos army, like, it became serious. Like, we wanted this to end. We wanted to end the tyranny once and for all, It became to the point where that's all we would ever play. Like, we'd take turns just playing against the Chaos Army just, to get this done. But that changed the rules a lot once we realized that there's actually 5 turns, because suddenly killing one of his warriors amounted to basically killing, 6 or 7 of my spearmen. So finally it made more sense why this army was so powerful. They're so powerful because they were worth a lot of points. They went a lot closer to winning. Each one you killed, you were, that much closer to actually winning the game. Because it now didn't become, empty the board of all their units. It became, a war of attrition, basically. Just survive long enough and pick off enough of his units, Get more of his before he gets more of yours. That's how you play against chaos, or at least that's how we did. Again, I don't know if they changed it, but if anybody still plays Warhammer and you haven't gone against chaos yet, that should be your strategy. Get more of them, then they get of you.